Behind me on every episode of The Wild Drop is a wall of just a few of the many blends we offer. I turn to them when I need some peace and calming, stress relief, or even an added boost to feel like I can reach my highest potential. The blending process began with Gary and continues today through science and inspiration. Hello and welcome to Young Living's podcast, The Wild Drop. My name is Jacob Young, your host. Young Living is the world leader in producing and distributing premium essential oils. And this podcast will provide you with drops of information about Young Living, including stories, history, products, lots of little fun facts, and even more. In studio with us today is a lifelong friend, Rex Kidman, who's been with us for almost 28 years now, and someone that my dad would call the master blender. Rex, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jacob. It's an honor and privilege to be here.
So, my dad called you the master blender, and I think you kind of need to explain why he called you the master blender. So, give a little backstory on what you do and why you do what you do.
Okay, well, I'm thrilled to hear him say that because I've never heard him say that to my face, but that's fine. Back in 93, June of 93, I graduated from Utah State with a bachelor's in business information systems. And so I was headed down the IT path, so to speak. And my first job out of school was working for an investment firm. And I'd been there for 2 or 3 months, and it just was not working out. And I remember coming home and telling my wife, she asked me one night, she says, "How's work going?" And I says, the best description that I could think of at the time was, I told her, I said, "You know those really rotten, smelly, dirty diapers that the kids have?" And she said, "Yeah." And she says, "I would rather change those 8 hours a day than go back to work." And she says, "Wow." She says, "That's pretty bad." And so she says, "Well, if it's that bad, just quit and get a different job." And I was working on the swing shift. And so I showed up one night at about 6 o'clock, and she goes, "What are you doing home so early?" She says, "Everything okay?" And I says, "Remember that conversation that we had about a week ago about the dirty, rotten, smelly diapers, and you told me that I could quit?" And all of a sudden there was this pause. And she says, "Yeah." And I says, "Well, I quit." And she goes, "Well, I was just kidding." And I says, "I wasn't." And so she says, "Now what are you going to do?" And I says, "Trust me." I says, "I know I have to get another job." And so I went and signed up for a temp agency, a temporary job agency. And they called me one day and said, "We have a job for you. There's a company in Riverton that has some computer problems, specifically on their commissions." So I said, "What's the name of the company?" And she said, "It's Young Living Essential Oils." Well, okay, never heard of them before. And so I drove down there, and I found out really quickly that the owner of the company, Gary Young, never met him before up to that point. Didn't know anything about essential oils. Didn't know, all I was worried about is just going in and hopefully solving this commission problem. Well, I found out shortly from Gary that he kind of hated computers. And he says, "I'm not convinced that you'll be able to solve the problem," because he says, "I'm still, in my mind's eye," he says, "I still believe that I can do the commissions better in my living room with my hand, with a pen or pencil and a calculator. And in the old days, that's the way commissions were done."
Yeah, he was an absolute math whiz, and he laid out everybody's commissions on the ground. He tallied it all up. He wrote it exactly, perfectly down to the cents and delivered them in mail. And
Yeah.
you're right, he did handwrite them. So he was not a fan of technology. I completely agree with that. And even up till the day he died, he was not a fan of technology, but he got better as time went on. So
Yes, he
anywho, go ahead.
he put up with it,
He did.
and it was a tool. It was a source of frustration to him, but he had a team of people that helped him get through it. And if it wasn't for that team of people, there would have been several laptops and desktops that would have been literally thrown through windows. Because I was with him several times where he'd be like, just get this computer out of here.
So how did you come to fix the commissions?
Well, that's the funny part of the story. I never did fix the commissions. About 6 months into it, Gary pulls me into his office one day and says, Rex, he says, I think you bit off more than you can chew. And my heart just dropped. And I thought, okay, I'm going to get fired. And he said, I still want you to work for the company. He says, I just don't know where I want you to be. So he says, just go out and keep doing what you're doing. Keep trying to figure out the commissions, and we'll figure it out. A week or so later, I'm working, and all of a sudden he came over and tapped me on the shoulder, and he said, follow me. Well, there was an employee that was in the lab at the time, and I won't go into all the details of that. But the position in the lab became vacant. And he took me back into the lab, and he had formulated the blend Joy previous to that. So he took me back into the lab, and he says, I want you to make a batch of Joy for me. Okay, what is Joy? And I was oblivious to all the smells of the oil in the lab. I was just, and I said, okay. And he says, okay, this is what I want you to do. And he gave me the set of instructions to make Joy. And so he said, okay, he says, I've got some things to do. He says, I'm going to leave you to it. Go ahead and make the Joy. And then when you finish, come find me. I said, fair, And so I started putting the oils one after another, as Gary had instructed me. And that was the beginning of a very long journey, because I didn't understand the chemistry, I didn't understand the oils, I didn't know anything about the oils, but what I understood is I understood me. And I understood what was happening in here. And then all of a sudden I started to notice that the oils started to, for whatever reason, my brain started to be aware of the aromas of the oils and the smell of the oils. And just kind of instinctively, as I would, let's say an ingredient is ylang. Well, as I was putting the ylang into the mixture, I would smell the ylang. And I was like, wow, this is really cool. I really loved the experience that I was having. I had never experienced anything like that in a work environment. And the thing that I also enjoyed about it is the last half of it, I had smelled each of the oils that I was putting in, but then as I finished it, I was able to smell the finished product. And I found myself, as I smelled the finished product, I found myself kind of enjoying those individual aromas that I had smelled before. And it was just, all of it was just a new experience for me. And something that I just instantly fell in love with. I finished the Joy Blend. And by then, the whole, I guess you could say, my heart, my soul, my spirit, whatever you want to say, however you want to call it, was just overwhelmed. And so in the back of my mind, all of a sudden, I remembered, oh, yeah, I need to go find Gary. And I went and found him, and he says, so what do you think about all this? And I says, Gary, I says, I'm 100% in. After we were sitting there talking, he was like, so do you think you'd be interested in working back here? And I says, on one condition. And he said, what's that? And I says, I don't know how to do any of this. And I says, I know you're busy running a business and a company. But I said, if you want me to do all of this, you're going to have to take time out of your busy day, and you're going to have to come back, and you're going to have to teach me everything so that I know how to do it the way you want it to be done. And he says, is that it? And I says, yeah, that's it. And he says, deal. And so that day started for the next 2 years. It started a very intensive training, and I'll tell you, there are no words that I have to describe the feeling, the joy, the happiness, the fulfillment of working with your dad on a day-to-day basis, as he taught me how to do the blends, as he taught me how to do the massage oils, as he taught me how to do the tinctures, as he taught me how to do the shampoos, the conditioners, and on and on and on. I'll never forget, ever forget, the day that he handed me the original set of blend formulas. And I said, what are these? And he said, they're all of my formulas, Rex. And I said, why are you giving them to me? And he says, because you're going to be making them. That's part of this deal. It, to this day, is under lock and key in the R&D area. And there's only a couple of people in the company today that use them.
That's a very small handful.
I'm one of them.
Yep.
Most people don't even know they exist. And most people, if they looked at them, they would be like, what are these?
We call them the ancient texts.
Yeah.
Rex, you're extremely humble with everything that you do, and I don't feel like you give yourself enough credit for what you do. You, of anybody, when it comes to Young Living as a whole, knows the oils almost just as well as my father knew, if not just as well as he knew them. And so with that being said, I'd love for you to hop into the making of blends and the science behind it, and what are the steps, and just kind of talking in a way that most people would understand, because there's some steps that are extremely complicated. There's also some steps with some info that we can't share, obviously, because that's what makes our blends extremely special. And so if you could do that'd be great.
So to get into the process of how we make a blend, your dad, when he made a blend, number one, every blend that he made over the 25 years that I worked with him had a purpose. He always used to say that if it smells good, that is cherry on top.
You're absolutely right, and I love that that's the number one step, is what is the purpose behind the blend. So what's step 2 once we've decided what the purpose of the blend is?
Step 2 is to come up with what I call a shopping list. A shopping list is a list of oils that fulfill that purpose
Those needs.
from A to Z. Step 3 is after you obtain that shopping list. Gary always used to say, you can have the best functional oil, but if you can't get it, or it's not available, or you can't get enough of it, then it doesn't do you any good to put it in the blend. So step 3 is to look at the
sourcing,
the availability, the sourcing, and see if there's going to be a problem. Case in point, when we brought out Kunzia, it took us 3 years of getting to a point where we was ready to release it, because when we first looked at it, we didn't have enough to keep it in stock. And so it took us 3 years of R&D and research and working with the plantation and the people to get to a point where we had enough to actually finally launch it.
So sourcing is 3 and making sure there's an abundant supply of it. And I think that's absolutely crucial. And it answers a lot of people's question of why does it take so long? And sourcing is one of those, because, we're at the mercy of Mother Nature. We don't just make this out of thin air. If we did, then we would always have an abundant supply of it. But we don't. They're organic and they come from Mother Nature. So that's a very important step. And what's the next step? Step 4.
The next step is kind of parallel to that, and that's the costing part. There's always a goal in mind that we're looking at, that we want to have it between this amount and this amount, and we strive to shoot for that. Most of the time, we're successful in hitting that. Sometimes we're on the outsides of that, and we have to deal with those situations. And
that pricing varies depending on what is inside the blend, the availability of, the ingredients that are inside that blend, as well as how difficult it is to distill and harvest the ingredients in that blend. There's a lot that goes into it.
Yes, there is.
And then there's also, if it has to go into a special container, if there has to be a special lid and stuff like that. So that's also a very important step. All these are very important steps, I should say.
But like for costing, if you put like helichrysum, Melissa, rose, several of the expensive ones, you can't expect that to be a cheap oil.
Yeah.
Because it's not going to be, and that's just the reality of it.
Yep.
That's the one thing that I loved about your dad as well, is he was looking at the functionality of it, because he's like, well, I need it to do this, and this is what it's going to do. And part of it is like, well, if it does this and it has these oils in it, it's probably going to be outside of that price point. And so, yes, they were dealing with that costing, but there was also the tug of war between, okay, it's going to be a little expensive, but it's going to do what I want it to do.
Yeah.
And in order to do what I want it to do, sometimes you have to dig a little further into your pocketbook.
And have to pay the price. A lot of people also don't realize that it does, at the end of the day, not only cost us a lot, but take us a lot to, harvest and distill oils. A lot of people always, I think the biggest complaint that I hear out in the field, or people who are wanting to join Young Living, is, I want to be part of Young Living, but it's so expensive. What makes them so different? And the first thing that we say is go to the farms and go through the process and see the process, and then you'll understand the pricing behind it as well. So great. So cost is the next step, analyzing the cost and how much it's going to be. Is there a step after that?
Once you look at the availability, and once you look sourcing, once sourcing gives you a green light, so to speak, then at that point in time, then you actually create the blend, and it goes through. You're making a bunch of different samples. Normally, what I'll do is I'll narrow it down through various different means to probably 2 samples that people like from a survey within the company from the employees. I'll narrow it down to 2 samples, just so that when I take it to your mom and the executives for final signature approval, I'm not wasting a lot of their time.
Yeah.
And so those are basically in a nutshell. Now, each one of those steps, you could talk for an hour on each one of those steps if you wanted to.
And we'll have to have you come back to really explain the in-depth science of actually creating the blend and the steps inside of, why we do this amount of drops and why we let it sit and do the measurements. And we'll have to bring you back on for that episode. So one story I quickly wanted to share really quickly, as it's all part of this, experience, in this episode, is the day that I wanted to do a presentation on frankincense and distillation. And I know you remember this day as if it was yesterday, because that whole day was just a hot mess, literally. I was tasked, just like any other fourth grade student was tasked to give a presentation on something that interested me. And I thought, well, what a great idea, why not present about frankincense and the process of distillation? Because nobody else in my classroom would give a presentation even close to that. And so I thought I'd be the shining star and just, kind of go along with that. And it was really fun because it was also around the same time that my dad was traveling and doing studies about frankincense and all that. And so I remember that we originally had a plan to do a see-through beaker and chamber to show the actual distillation process of how to do it. And people could see the frankincense melting and then going into the condensation form and all that. And I remember, we were in the room that we had the science show set up in, just practicing and getting everything set up. And you had the heat plate, the hot plate, turned on and getting everything ready while I was practicing. And I remember right as I exited the room, I just hear this, and what had happened? The glass condenser, or not the condenser, but the glass cooker, the see-through cooker had broken.
Yep.
And the frankincense had caught on fire with the hot plate. And smoke was all up through the room, and we were so worried that the fire alarms were going to get set off and all this other stuff. And I remember my mom stood on top of a chair and was, took I think she took the header off my billboard, my poster, and was trying to get the smoke away from the smoke detectors. And, I came running back in, and you and Dad were cleaning up all the frankincense and stomping and putting the fire out and all that and everything. And I mean, this was like 10 minutes before I was supposed to give a presentation. So my mom said, you should probably run down and just tell everybody everything's okay and ask for a little bit more time. And then she said, Rex, do we have another distiller?
Yeah, I'll never forget when we was at the school and after the fire started and the smoke and everything and your mom turned to me and said, we have another distiller? And I says, yeah, I have a stainless steel distiller. It's not the all glass and everything. And so I was talking, then she turned to me and she said, you're still here, Rex. What's the problem? She says, get out of here. Jacob needs, so I ran out of the building, and in my mind I was thinking, please let all the red lights be green. Well, I was able to get down there, and I'm just sweating blood because I was running around in my mind thinking, where is everything? And got all the distiller and came back. And I remember walking in the door, and as soon as your mom saw me and I started bringing it in, it was just this big, huge sign of relief. And we got her all put together and all taken care of. And she goes, and then she turned to me and she goes, thank you very much for, and then the rest was up to Jacob.
Those memories, like what an unforgettable day, an amazing day, a chaotic day, a crazy day, and a miracle in itself that the sprinklers in the school didn't go off and everything like that. So thank you for being there. Thank you for helping me out with that. And thank you for all that you've done, with your years of vast experience and knowledge and expertise and just your commitment to, not only the company, but to my family as well. So thank you so much for coming on, Rex. Really appreciate the time that you've taken out of your day to come and share your stories and your expertise and your knowledge. And it's been grand, and hope to have you back soon on the podcast.
You're very welcome, Jacob.
And thank you all for tuning in to this episode of the YL Drop. Don't forget, you can listen to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and our website at www.youngliving.com. Thank you, Young Living family. Don't forget to oil up. This is Jacob Young, dropping out. Take care.